I'm really thrilled to share this group of emerging artists with you all. And I hope that you're inspired to apply. If you feel your work is a voice that needs to be heard, I hope you'll give NCECA a chance to share that voice. So I'd like to introduce our first emerging artist, Austen Brantley. Austen is a self-taught sculptor who fell in love with the art of ceramics at 15 years of age. Over the last decade of creating, his work has taken him to multiple countries to hone his skills, produce several monument commissions throughout the United States, and a plethora of exhibitions, including a recent purchase by the African American Museum of Dallas. Brantley is featured in multiple publications and interviews and is on the cover of Scene magazine. I'm so pleased to introduce to you Austen Brantley.
My name's Austen Brantley. I'm a ceramic sculptor. I don't usually talk in front of people, so this is gonna be a ride for both of us. I was first inspired by a ceramic teacher in high school. No one kind of really believed in me back then. I think I was around 15 years old, and I liked to play sports. I really wanted to fit in with everybody, but I didn't have my own voice, and I didn't have a way of really articulating and expressing myself. I remember my ceramic teacher, he really cared about his students. Every time anybody did anything good in his class, he would make sure everyone knew about it. He would hold it up in his hand and kind of gracefully walk around the class and point out everything right about that pot or that pinch pot, hand-built thing, whatever you did right, he cared. And I always wanted that experience. So I kind of really took that initiative to try and make something in his class. I would be the last one to leave and the first one there, and he'd have to kick me out, kind of shove me out sometimes. This is a piece by Frederick Hart, who created the Ex Nihilo sculpture in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Cathedral. I saw fragments of these when I was in New Orleans, and I was so deeply moved by the poetic imagery and the attention to detail of the human form. It was really inspiring for me to see somebody just put their all into a piece like this. He had worked on this for about 20 years in clay, and then it was moved into the limestone medium after that. When I saw these pieces in front of me, I was completely moved. I didn't even know what sculpture really was. I didn't understand what a high relief sculpture was, where a figure is coming and emerging from a background. So it was really inspiring for me to see something kind of almost flowing from an earthly form. And it gave this example of human beings emerging from something. And I always felt like I was emerging from something. These were made in 2013, and I had created these as I think they were inspired by those pieces. They were made in stoneware clay, and they were based on the emergence of figures from stone. So almost this contrast between human beings and earth. I would take lava rocks from my landscaping jobs and press them into the clay and see how I could get all these different textures. And I remember putting mason stain on top of them after they were bisque and then refiring them. This was another piece I made in 2013. I remember that the one that I'm working on in this picture, it was too big for the kiln. The kiln was only about 27 inches, so I ended up only being able to keep the hand of the sculpture. These are my teachers. Jeff Hartshorn on the left, who was my first high school ceramic teacher, and then when I wasn't able to afford art school, I took community college classes at Oakland Community College. And on the right was Robert and Gail Piepenberg, who were my mentors and professors. This is a piece that I made in 2017 based on all those experiences that I had. By 2014, I had been working with those college professors to create a portfolio so that I could hopefully get a scholarship to attend an actual college or art school. Instead, I ended up being picked up by galleries and even was gifted a studio by one where I was able to exclusively work with them. This was a piece out in Chicago that I made for a collector. It's called I Exist. And it's about the emerging, you still have that emerging going on in my work, where it's pieces emerging from either like a chaos or disarray. This piece was fired in about 7 pieces because I had like a 27-inch scut kiln, so I started to learn that I had to start putting stuff back together. This was my first studio where I would work on probably almost 20 pieces at the same time. I had a studio cat in here that's probably hard to find in this picture because he's always hiding. I actually lived in the studio, so I had an apartment in there. I would work pretty much every day. This is a piece of one of my childhood friends. It's titled Dreamer. I remember when I first started sculpting, he would ask me all the time to make a sculpture of him, like every day, to the point where it got annoying. And I'm like, bro, you're not pretty enough, man. Like, you're not a girl, okay? And I remember this one time he was in my studio and we had just like been hanging out and stuff, and I was like, I got this kind of idea, and this wasn't it actually. We had made maybe like 3 or 4 different sketches, and then he accidentally took this pose, and that's when I started to learn about the spontaneity of clay and also the spontaneity of poses. Something really activated in me where it became the idea of like turning emotions into the work, because I felt like he was experiencing something, maybe something that I couldn't even understand in words, but I wanted to capture it. And that's what really went into like this piece that I made for the Canfield Consortium in Detroit. That's a nonprofit organization that uplifts different neighborhoods in Detroit. This is a piece in bronze that's actually across the street from the Obama Leadership Academy. And I wanted something that kind of reflected that beauty of children before they kind of see the ugliness of the world. Because I always felt as a kid, if I played with flowers, people would like kind of bully me. And for me, this was like an opportunity to reflect on my childhood, but also give something to other children. This is a piece called Power in the Struggle. It's made out of stoneware and it's bisque-fired, and I actually wood stained it. I remember in art fairs, I would always try and eavesdrop on how people would get their finishes. I would always like kind of ask them and they'd be like, get out of here, kid. I would hear people talk about trying different mediums. I love the way that ceramicists would like talk about ideas in this like expansive community of like, oh, I just tried this glaze, or I just tried this thing, look how it did it. And I would listen to them talk about stuff and just like hear things here and there and then experiment in the studio. In Detroit, we have this piece called the Joe Louis fist, and it's a sculpture of just like a fist it kind of represents Detroit in a way. It's like a very strong sculpture. And I always thought about that with the power fist. But I always feel like Black power is something that has to be upheld. It has to be something that's taken care of, and it takes a lot of grace and stability. So I have these figures at the root of the piece almost, just so that they are like holding up this powerful symbol. This is one of the pieces I brought to NCECA. It's stoneware and wood stained as well. It's me kind of experimenting with the idea of hair and braids and how nature and us can look the same and be one and the same thing. I'm really inspired by African masks and African traditions. This is a piece that I made called Siren, and it's about siren goddesses in Africa. And the reason I like those is because I feel like I've had experiences where I've had to be taken down a peg, or I've had to suffer through things. The African siren goddesses, they actually abduct you so that you transform into a better version of yourself. And I always think of it as a way of tough love. When I saw these African masks from West Africa that had cowrie shells in the eyes, I always wondered why they did that. And I found out that it's because the ancestors can actually see through the African traditions through rituals and dances. And I wanted to, in a way, have my ancestors see through my sculptures. These are 2 pieces I titled Chilled, and where I was actually traveling in this place called Virginia in northern Greece. They had 100 different excavation sites where there were these tombs for Macedonian princes, emperors, queens. And I always liked how much intricacy was put into just the armor. And I like the idea of play with the figures. I love how they're gracefully kind of moving around, forming and creating their own narratives. These are Senufu masks from the Senufu people of Côte d'Ivoire. I'm really inspired by these African masks because I love the figures sitting on top of them. It's really inspiring to see concepts that I didn't even know I had already. These figures are almost like emerging from the top of these, and I hadn't even seen them before. And then they inspired these works. These are my crown series that are inspired by those African masks, where the figures are just emerging from the top of the heads. I always feel like people should be their own crown, that you should honor yourself. That's the inspiration from those pieces. When I look back on my journey and using lava rocks, using textures and forms to create stone-looking, filling forms and have emerging figures from that in these triumphant poses, I think about how it almost feels like the people in my life have been like a mountain for me. So this is a piece I titled Mountain, where I was taking those textures, the same textures from the lava rocks, and creating a stone, but instead also making it the form of an afro for a black woman. Because I feel like all the black women in my life have been an amazing thing that I built my life on, and they've been like the world to me. So I titled this piece Mountain. It's a stoneware, bisque-fired, and wood-stained. This is a piece I titled Condessa, and it's of the same kind of series of the Crown series, where the figures are emerging or struggling to find themselves and kind of emerging from the hair of the sculpture. I really like the texture of braids, as you can see. I have a lot of fun doing the details of them. This is a piece that I actually covered with an acrylic bronze paint. So I actually had to put a base coat on the bisque-fire primer, and then I sprayed different oxides on the surface. And just like glazes, it has a chemical reaction. It takes a little bit of time. So I'll paint it and then go party for like an hour or two, come back, and then my piece is done. This is a piece I really love called Mamawata. It's of terracotta, and it's actually first, after it's bisque-fired, I put a polyurethane, and then I spray paint it with this very, very cheap spray paint. I've been using this spray paint actually for 10 years now. And I used to use it around the house for like working on stuff and doing chores. And it was terrible at everything except artwork. So for this piece, I would actually like spray paint the piece and then wipe it off. That's when I started to learn how to kind of play with things and use rudimentary materials. Instead of using glazes, I would kind of try and find my own surfaces. This is a piece titled Tribe, and it's of that same style where it's the terracotta and the bronze patina. I use hydrocal to cover up some of the seam lines of the pieces so that everything is cohesive, because I use limestone as the base. I really love using different materials working together as one object. So I feel like clay is usually the goal, but I feel like I can sometimes add different things to it. And that's my work, guys. Thank you. Thank you. I had the pleasure of being one of the emerging artists and working alongside other great emerging artists from all over. I've learned a lot from them, and I want to introduce to you Heidi McKay Casto, who is a studio artist and faculty member at the University of Iowa. She earned her MFA and MA from the University of Iowa and her BFA from the Ohio State University. Her work has been featured in over 50 exhibitions at venues such as the Charlie Cummings Gallery, Clay Akar, the Clay Art Center, Kobo Gallery, and the Eclectic Center Gallery. Casto has been a featured artist with Art Access, and in 2022 was selected for 2 purchase prizes in the Strictly Functional Pottery National. She was named a Ceramics Monthly Magazine Emerging Artist. I'm welcoming Heidi.
Thank you. I got my fans right here. But really, all of NCECA, wow, you are such a great family to be a part of. I love this clay community. Before I start, I have a few thank yous. First, to NCECA and everyone that made this possible, and to this stellar group of emerging artists. It's been an unforgettable week sharing the stage with you. To my recommenders, Rebecca Harvey and Lindsay Pekaski, You are both an inspiration to me as artists and mothers. I am so glad you are a part of my journey. To the crew at Iowa, you are so supportive and fun to work with. I am lucky to walk in and to work and see your faces and bursting creativity every day. To my family, who all drove to see me today, you have never once doubted my talent or my dreams. And to this tight crew, Andy, I cannot believe the adventures we've been on since we met in the ceramics studio at Ohio State 21 years ago. I really hit the jackpot when I found someone who could both make me dinner and a bucket of glaze. Amari and Beatrice, you are the magic in my life, and this talk is for you. My work is shaped by my reality. I am Heidi, artist, professor, and mom. My reality is a connected web of perceptions, beliefs, and instincts developed from a lifetime of relationships and experiences that shift and mold how I see the world and the people around me. Unconsciously, I've developed observations and biases of the world or art or my bonds with others over time. Through these sensitivities, beliefs take root and grow. Without examination, a belief can be built from something your parents told you when you got in trouble as a kid, combined with a self-help book, and intertwined with an overheard conversation, and sealed together with a passive-aggressive comment from a relative. Without awareness, life can be lived based on these uncontested beliefs. Rules can be made in the studio, and judgmental hierarchies of our work that label one type of work superior to another often persist. One of the fundamental building blocks of processing life for me was the way my parents would connect behavior to lessons and lessons to larger metaphors. This was their way of communicating, and it's how I began to understand the world. Metaphors transformed mundane routines into real-life storybook pages, creating a belief structure greater than the limitations in front of me. These word pictures conveyed a relatable world with a little enchantment sprinkled in. Stories we told to bring significance to the mundane. In my work, I anthropomorphize animals as metaphors for lived experiences. I use personification of animals to soften the awkwardness and vulnerability of human interactions. When I feel incapable of understanding my emotions, it helps to think of them objectively. I find myself contemplating the instinctual needs of animals in their daily journey for survival. I'm not a scientist, but this seems and feels like it's mostly about instinct. Our instincts as humans are often so clouded by insecurity, guilt, shame, and embarrassment. Animals, on the other hand, they seem present, acute, and directed in their instinctual behaviors. I wonder about my root instincts, what I might make and do and see in the absence of the world's pressure, judgment, and expectation. Women's instincts are historically and presently tempered at best. We are often shut down and perpetually dismissed. Our reproductive choices are limited and controlled. We are urged to be quieter, less disruptive, and less emotional, but smile more. All of this gets run through a personal social filter, designed to benefit others rather than ourselves. Animals are void of these inhibitions, however. I find it so fascinating. My work navigates this difference between our human experience and my imagined version of a related animal one. I am drawn to art as a vehicle for storytelling and opening up personal experiences for conversation and connection. In undergrad and grad school, I made human and animal-scaled works, and I loved the ability to tell stories through clay. I'm drawn to clay's sculptural possibilities. When I became a mother, however, my time in the studio, it was limited and unpredictable. I quickly realized if I wanted to keep touching clay, I needed to shift my practice to being a studio potter. It made much more sense working in small batches and taking breaks as needed. When the pandemic slowed the world down, more space emerged to question perceptions and beliefs. Those questions I had formed over years of balancing art and motherhood. I realized I missed telling stories with my work. As the pandemic trudged on, I felt like my growth as a human and an artist finally converged into a succinct dialogue. It was in those slower moments that I gained confidence to take bigger risks and to let go of my self-imposed rules about ceramics and find a personal language for what I wanted to express through clay. When we are in tune with our own personal narratives and creative energy, the world responds. I also confess to be an over-planner at heart. Plans make me feel calm and in control, and repetitive work is a more natural extension of my personality. That being said, if I approach my work with careful, precise planning, the magic is lost. What has helped is to think about my current practice as a process where problems are set up to be solved using my intuition. I first throw the forms as a meditation. Shapes come next, hand-built like a puzzle. I make these more sculptural additions without a plan of what vessel they will be connected to, and then match and play the shapes as if I'm deciding which earrings or hairstyle to wear with an outfit. This method forces the conglomeration of unexpected, playful elements and requires trust that when the pieces emerge from the bisque, there will be possibilities to work with. I think of this instinctual trust as a metaphor for what I've learned about parenting from trusting instincts about my own body and learning to trust my kids. A long time ago, I miscarried my first pregnancy. This created a lack of trust in my body. Later, despite this insecurity, I listened to my intuition when I realized my second pregnancy had stopped moving inside of me at 37 weeks. Although I faced considerable embarrassment and doubt, I pushed through and followed my instincts. I listened and delivered a healthy girl through emergency C-section 13 years ago. My instincts were growing, but I truly did not regain trust in my body until I was pregnant with my second daughter, now 10. I was terrified that in that pregnancy I couldn't trust my body and that we might lose her if I wasn't hypervigilant. I had to make a then incredibly impossible choice between a conventional vaginal birth, which I had internalized as the right way to do it, or plan for another cesarean delivery. As I lay on the operating table being stitched back up, the surgeon leaned over the curtain and said, "I'm not sure what made you choose to have another C-section, but your uterus was so thin it would have ruptured during a conventional labor, and we probably would have lost you both." What a wave of confirmation that I had made the right choice, and that somehow through the cacophony of voices and expectations in my head, I had found my instinct and chosen to trust it. I have never felt comfortable being defined as a potter or a sculptor, rather both and. In the same way, I know that I now need to be both an artist and a mother, both artist and professor. I have always been intrigued by duality, words that have two meanings, or the way kids intuit different shapes in the clouds. I think a lot about this idea of two things at once, and how much our lives are spent in the gray areas. If this is possible, the options in my work are endless. It isn't until after a piece is bisqued that I imagine the possibility that a shape could be a red panda wishing on a dandelion, or a macaw considering its birthday wish, or both. These shapes can be anything. I believe if this duality is possible for the shape or cup, it is possible for me and for all of us. I can be a mother and an artist. I can be happy and a professor. I can be a potter and a sculptor. I can support my partner's artistic career and also be supported by him in mine. I can be a mom and a teacher, a life partner and a work partner. My work can be awkward and delightful to use. The beauty is in embracing it all. As my girls grow older, my instincts will lose their protective power. Yet I can teach them to trust their own instincts. This is advice we can all learn, to not let the world speak louder than our own internal compass, and to embrace the nuance of all the possibilities of a both-and life. Thank you. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce the next emerging artist. Born and raised in China, Jing Huang is a ceramic artist currently living and working in Charlotte, North Carolina. She received her BA from Jingzhen Ceramics Institute advanced diploma from Sheridan College, and her MFA from Alfred University. Jing has lectured, curated exhibitions, conducted workshops, and exhibited extensively through the US, Canada, China, and UK. Welcome, Jing.
Hello, NCECA. Thank you, Heidi, for introducing me. My name is Jing Huang. I was born and raised in the small mountainous city of Guilin in southern China. My hometown is famous for its breathtaking landscape and scenery. The 3-year-old girl on the left is me. When I was that little, my parents sent me to study the traditional Chinese ink painting and calligraphy, which became my first memory and experience about art. Even though I have lost most of those conscious memories, this experience still sets an invisible logic in my work today. My journey in ceramics began in Jingdezhen, known as the porcelain city since the Song dynasty in China. When you enter the city, you can easily tell it has a deep connection with porcelains because they are literally everywhere. Starting there for 4 years helped me gain many skills rooted in an understanding of Chinese traditions and history, such as the strict requirement of techniques, subtle aesthetics, and a high respect for tradition and history. In 2013, I brought my art practice abroad to Canada to study at Sheridan College, and later to the US to pursue my master's degree at Alfred University. Integrating the complexity of North American culture, people, and surroundings through hands-on academic study and residencies shaped the new aspect of my personality and mindset, and further influenced how I make my work. I had both positive and negative experience living in a foreign country. Over time, I started to learn that my background and my personality brings a fresh voice to the community, and I should not suppress them. Guided by the feelings of living in an unfamiliar landscape, meeting different people, and experiencing new cultures, my figurative works made between 2013 and 2018 explored my shifting identity, dislocation, and cultural displacement. Before leaving Canada, I made an installation named The Deer of Night Colors, inspired by the story of the Buddhist Jataka tale of the same name, referencing the mural paintings of Mogao Cave from the Northern Wei period in China. My work was expanded upon my previous studies by delving into the narratives of my culture and traditions. In this installation, I have reinterpreted the characters by using the palette from the original. Their gestures have been manipulated and their faces have been changed. I'm wondering, as we have all been shaped from one place to another, is the story still be the same? When a new life meets an old one, that moment draws me close. I take photos when I travel, and these different types of mountains become the photos I enjoy the most when I visit my album. Tasting newness and oldness at the same time, I can experience the distance and difference between there and here, then and now. This is my 9th year living away from my country. 9 years could be short. It is too short to be able to adapt myself to the environment here. But 9 years could also be long. It is long enough to nearly get lost in the city where I grew up. Last time I went back home and visited my family in Guilin, and everything looked so different and obscure compared to my memories of place and people. So my boundaries are now blurring because I'm questioning what is new and unfamiliar to me. If the distance between China and North America is 7,723 kilometers, what's the distance between the previous me and current me? If there are 12 hours between home and here, what time is it now? When I arrived in Canada, I wrote these questions in Chinese. I translate and continue to reflect on them still, to remind me of who I am and how I began this journey. Old, new, familiar, unfamiliar. I am constantly searching for myself somewhere in between. Amid the dislocation of ambiguity of being neither here nor there, I anchor myself by tracing the liminal space between my past and present. This research of the liminal space in my grad school started with the depiction of my hometown's karst limestone mountains. And the title of this piece, 山水, is a Chinese word, meaning landscape. The literal translation of 山水 is mountain water. I marked this too in the picture for you to see how they evolved in history. Chinese characters were developed through the use of images, and I remember the process of practicing writing Chinese was very similar to drawing an image. You need to use a combination of technical skills and imagination, considering each shape of stroke and balancing the space in between to compose an overall beautiful structure. Hidden is an installation that played this idea of image, balance, and space from my early experience practicing Chinese calligraphy and painting, including the depiction of my mountains from hometown, my figure, and several ink paintings. This work becomes a recollection of my past, present, and imagination, reminiscent of the ways of using color in Chinese painting, such as color washes, wet underpainting, and layers of color. My work is also comprised of multiple layers of ceramic materials, using a soft color palette and velvety glaze surfaces to mimic the Chinese pigment. The figure, which I believe would not be able to function in the present or move forward, were a potent symbol for me to carry the story. I also reference the Chinese scholar's rock, inspired by memories of my father gathering strange stones while hiking. Usually displayed in our tea room or living room, I thought they were simply souvenirs when I was, from my dad's trip when I was young. But later I realized that his collection actually reflected to a tradition in our culture. During the Song Dynasty, the Chinese literally took a piece of rock from nature as a representation of the actual landscape, to observe and experience, to display and appreciate for their surroundings. And this wonder of the scholar's rock mirrors my feeling and my early memories of my hometown, my culture and tradition. Unlike the traditional manner of displaying the scholar's rock on top of a wooden base or table, my work might be installed on the metal frame, an architectural platform against the wall, or with an found object, and each sculpture offers an environment. Influenced by the concept of empty space in Chinese painting, in this work, void spaces, the bottom of the mountain silhouette and the edge of the frame create an active space, an optical illusion, allowing change and transition to unfold. Instead of the linear way of making a sculpture from a sketch, design, or prototype, I hand-built my work part by part without a blueprint and assemble them together once I have plenty of components. For a sculpture that needs to stand upright, it is my intention to build it horizontally on the table from the beginning in order to achieve an unknown structure. And in this case, the greenware is usually too fragile to move, so I can only see the final picture through the completion of the process. After reorientation, the large ceramic rock can only stand with the support of its surroundings, and a tiny part of the rock attached to the wall, together with the pedestal, balances the rock in this unique corner. I approach this system as a way to rethink and to rediscover my past in order to create new meanings and to make things that move beyond my imagination. During these unconventional and unpredictable ways of making, firing, and installing, the position of my work shifts and changes to contribute new gestures and unique scenery. Many of my works has the potential to stand differently. I fire my sculptures suspended on stilt, letting glazes run and pull naturally with form, bringing a sense of nature and flow into my work. Mountains, clouds, and rivers appear frequently in my work. These three elements coalescing from memories from my hometown also speak of different relationships to place. Recalling and abstracting this element in my memory gives me ability to translate and graft them together into a poetic ceramic moment. Unlike languages, clay is a universal vehicle that allows me to express myself without barriers. My diasporic experience of traveling and living in different cultures has taught me how the power of interacting in diverse communities can affect an individual's growth, values, mindset, and creativity. In 2022, facing increased awareness of social tension, violence, injustice, and AAPI hate, I co-curated an exhibition titled Here, There, Now, Then, In Between Journeys, that brings together 9 artists inspired by their cross-cultural understanding between the cultures of China and the US. Acknowledging of our lives and histories, we want to use our work to generate new and evolving voices, a transformed power, and the potential for integration of cultures in the whole ceramic community. Until I moved away from home, I had little conscious appreciation of my surroundings. This natural appreciation of my past and my own culture is something I can only develop through a long-term departure and quite a bit of wandering. My recent body of work, the Loop series, is based on this idea of an amorphous shape that indicates no beginning nor end, but instead place emphasis on the winding path itself. Turning around, up and down, my life experiences accumulate into a process of change and discovery. I believe for some destinations, I can only arrive at by making a detour. As a perpetual shifter and seeker, I am drawn to explore environment, landscapes, new context for myself to be and my work to become. I consider my work to be neither a representation of my hometown, nor the view of any specific location. It is a process of seeking a deeper understanding of myself and experience in the world. No matter if the sceneries echoes my past or present, east or west, in this transitional space of my work, landscapes coexist. Thank you. I am really pleased to introduce our next emerging artist, Deshun Peoples. Deshun Peoples is a ceramic artist and designer from Chicago. He is currently a lecturer at Chicago State University and pursues his Master's of Social Work degree at the University of Chicago. Deshun has exhibited widely at the Clay Studio, Eutectic Gallery, Ulster Center for Craft. Deshun was a Fulbright scholar and a part of the American Craft Council's Emerging Artists cohort in 2022. Let's welcome Deshun.
So hello all, my name is Deshun Peoples. Thank you. I am from and currently living in Chicago. I'm a collegiate educator, artist, designer, aspiring community organizer, social worker, and therapist, and now an NCECA Emerging Artist. I titled my talk, The Price of Admission, because I wanted to think deeply into what it cost me to be here. I want to celebrate the joys and be humbled and motivated by the sorrows and fully inhabit the spectrum of emotions that it takes to live a full, authentic life. I'm gonna start off by saying something maybe slightly controversial at a ceramics conference, but I do not live and breathe clay. It is only one small part of what I do, of who I am, and how I move through the world. A much larger part of what I endeavor to do as a human being is build community and connection that lead to lasting feelings of empathy, restoring dignity, and increasing belonging. I believe that care happens in the collective, and I did not get here alone. I did it through leaning on others for care, support, and guidance. This is a picture of my mom, my grandmother, and I and I believe that in this trio lives the possibilities of all that I am and will ever hope to be. Family is my world, my biological kinship, as well as chosen family and friends. Their love and support have carried me through my darkest moments and are the reason I am able to stand here today, attempting authenticity and finding joy in becoming who I am. Here I've highlighted two important mentors on my journey: my kind, revolutionary supervisor of the Spark LGBTQIA+ peer mentoring program at Bates College, Lexi Mucci, and my amazingly queer, Black, brilliant theorist undergraduate advisor, Dr. Charles Nero. I've been fortunate enough to stand alongside and be trained under deeply invested stewards of the power of the collective. They inspired me to lead with love and center joy and passion. Because of them, I'm learning to prioritize grounding. I'm striving to be grounded in my body, grounded in love, grounded in compassion, and grounded in the ways that I show up for community and try to show up for myself. I want to read a brief excerpt from a vignette from my MFA thesis. The thesis was titled, "Beauty Still Lives Here, Narratives of Radical Self-Love." And the vignette was titled, "Granny Ma." And the quote is, "My grandma's china set was mostly a decorative piece, but it was understood that they were to be used only for a special occasion. My whole life, to this day, and the unimpressive, shameful, sad turbulence of living in poverty, my grandma has not known an occasion special enough to use her china set. I was subconsciously predisposed to a deflated sense of value through relationality to domestic ceramic objects. Reorienting myself toward these objects would be the primary way that I, as my therapist insisted, charted my path to healing in clay. I didn't know it at the time, but this pot on the left, inspired by the Chinese Song Dynasty bottle on the right, would catalyze a likely lifelong conversation about beauty, value, and tangentially, equity and justice. Here are some of the pieces that I made during the exploration of porcelain, Chinese Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing Dynasty bottle forms. This exploration took me to Jingdezhen, China 2 times, once in college and once right after college for Fulbright research. And when I came back from China for the first time, I was trying to challenge myself to find the me and the us in my work. I was really invested in these porcelain bottles, but had no entry point into the work I was making. I couldn't find the Blackness, I couldn't call out the queerness in ways that felt significant and genuine enough. In addition to struggling to find a place for me in the vessels I was so captivated by, I was also feeling a cognitive and a sort of spiritual disconnect from the art I was making and the social work I was doing in the world that revolved around building intentional spaces dedicated to care and empathy, particularly for marginalized folks. I worked for many nonprofits and did really activating support work for LGBTQIA+ youth, Southeast Asian immigrants, and East African refugee communities, and most recently, Black and brown, trans, and gender nonconforming communities on the south side of Chicago. I enjoyed exploring moments of pause and introspection through these pots I made in grad school as I finally began to find the language for why I was so drawn to porcelain and Chinese bottle forms. It was primarily about wanting to make works that are, in a sense, artifacts of an imagined world in which I had agency, power, and the same unquestioned value, dignity, and humanity that the current society seemed to deny me and us so often. During the pandemic, I found peace, building digital spaces that helped me envision how both my physical body and my work might take up space as an act of reclamation and empowerment. I wanted to consecrate the idea of cups holding an unreasonable amount of space on a table through this sculptural installation. This could serve as a metaphor for the ways in which I was learning to be present and proclaim my legitimacy in a space while also being accountable to community and our collective needs within that same space. Next, I want to touch a bit on color. Abstraction for me has always been a way to explore infinite narratives through sometimes less tangible, which could stand in for so many other relevant concepts and experiences. The major color triads I have explored were primary color series, which I showed a little bit earlier on, this one here, which is the African American flag series with the red, black, and green, queer royalty with purple, black, and gold, and critical black theory featured here. Each of these color triads references a specific moment and pay homage to histories of oppression and resistance in various multifaceted ways that I don't have the time to get into right now. I'll briefly highlight some explanations of my Emerging Artists exhibition. I consider the work to be autoethnographic. Through my personal experiences, I am exploring intergenerational narratives of love and trauma that encapsulate larger cultural understandings of Blackness, queerness, and marginality. In the piece titled Grindr Love Letters, I am directly quoting fatphobic, femphobic, misogynist, and anti-Black quotes from Grindr, a gay dating and hookup app that I went on initially to find belonging and community with other queer people. In the piece, Queer Memories, I am exploring homophobic language that I grew up hearing in my family and other Black communities that made it hard for me to feel at home in my body and express authenticity. Both of these spaces, while sources of pain and trauma, were also sites for growth, intimacy, connection, and love. I wanted to center living in the margins and celebrate the complexity of honest relationships. Home is where the heart is, but it is also where the hurt is. And we have to live in the tension of that daily. So I wanted to make space for honoring that immutable truth. The first and the last person to approach me as I was setting up and taking down my Emerging Artists exhibition they were both Black custodians. The first Black custodian walked up to me and he said, "I'm so excited to see another brother in the space." And then he apologized for being weird. And then I said to him, "No need to apologize. I appreciate the comment. We out here." The last person to come up to me was another Black custodian. She expressed to me her frustration upon seeing no N-words on one of my pieces. And she said that she was ready to fight the person who made it and made it a point to directly find someone in charge to see if it could be taken down. One of her colleagues showed her my image in one of the catalogs and said, "Don't worry, he's also Black." And then she calmed down. And then she proceeded to tell me how important the work was and that she was thankful that I was shedding light on a really important story. And then last night, in a conversation over a few drinks with my best friend, Justin Quaker, I was reminded that even though I was stressing out about the technical quality of the work and I was nervous that it didn't hit the mark of work that I had made previously, he reminded me that the work was reaching the right people, that the people who needed to see the work were seeing it, and it was grounding their narratives and reaching communities that were really, really important to me. So in closing, I want to say, let's all be a little bit more kind. Let's all be a little bit more understanding. Let's all be a little bit more compassionate, and let's practice being more human together. Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing a new dear friend, Kate Strachan. She's an interdisciplinary artist who has been living and working in Asia for the past decade. Her work has been exhibited across Asia, in China, Japan, and Taiwan, including New Taipei Inga Ceramic Museum 2022 Ceramic Biennial. She is also the recipient of Shigaraki Cultural Ceramic Park Exchange, supported by the Japanese government, and has most recently been awarded the EKWC Scholarship Grant, sponsored by the Dutch government. Please help me welcome Kate.
I have always experienced the world in heightened senses, and being overstimulated easily and never more than this very moment right here. I have questioned why my body responds in certain ways, why my eyes lock on to certain forms, and why my hand repeats the same movement during creation. There is no clearer view than the one looking down from where we have come, to know the soil from where we have grown. To try to answer this, the excavation must take place. My background is formally in fiber, and I found myself in disillusion after a few years living and working in New York's fashion industry. I wanted a radical shift, found my way to clay, and left for Japan to undergo a 2-year apprenticeship in Kanazawa. In Japan, I felt connected to the subtleties of beauty, touch, and austerity. I had no path after my apprenticeship. However, a chance encounter with Zhang Qingyuan Lao Su started to place the puzzle pieces together, and I found myself in Taiwan. Beginning my MFA at the Tainan National University of the Arts. Similar to the US, Taiwan's connection to reaching family history and origins has become an important movement. And there at the university, I was pushed to look in the mirror and face my reflection. And those who have visited our studio or my fellow students very much understand what I'm talking about. There are those certain atmospheres that draw you into yourself, to the real encounter with oneself. Now, after so long being away from the West, I finally uncovered myself staring at someone whom I knew nothing about. Living between so many countries and cultures, I have been consumed with fitting in to my surroundings, but who was I at the core? When we question this, there is a nostalgia that begins to float to the surface. Familiar places, spaces, and smells all seem to be calling. As a native of Pennsylvania, my childhood home was filled with collections of pastimes, hand-me-downs, and embroidered fracture house blessing. A part of the folk arts and crafts of Pennsylvania, which are deeply rooted from German immigrants, which came to be known as the Pennsylvania Dutch. My family's lineage led me down this rabbit hole to study fracture manuscripts, which were said to be written in spirit, and a voyage to write my own had begun. My work is formed on the basis of the ideas from the fracture documents, which are often crafted for house blessings, spiritual poems, birth and death certificates, a repetition of written letters and numbers. Because there is no better light than to bring humor to dark corners, Howard Cutler taught me about exploration and experimental ideas and challenging methods. Curiosity may kill that cat, but it will never ever kill original ideas. Here, in my own fracture document series, the Pennsylvania motto, "Nothing is certain except death and taxes." Here, the word belief is veiled with a thin sheet of ceramic. While it is veiled, it also unveils the body of the word. Surrounding this belief is its framed Pennsylvania motto of death and taxes. What contrasting thoughts. Paper, like clay, is a delicate material, and with this in mind, I use ultra-thin layers of clay to evoke femininity, fragility, and invisible senses. Supported materials such as felt for silence, wax for preservation, and wood for primitiveness. Sometimes, words are integrated for playful questioning. If you have ever heard the term colograms, then you might have heard of a French poet called Guillaume Apollinaire, who made colograms fashionable during the 20th century, and his example here in the center. However, the original idea dates much further back in the 9th century on the left and right from Greece. In my own fracture series, I use the term kilograms to create one of my documents. This is the center and the 2 side panels. On the background is written the prefix miss, while on the foreground are layers of letters spelling O-B-E-Y, miss obey, creating the form of a once bitten apple. While on the right-hand side, we see the prefix dis added to the obey for the fully eaten apple, completely disregarding one's authority. With all of these setting the stage of the characteristics of my work, what was I trying to convey? Now, knowing myself, I understand myself as a doer, as a performer of action. My actions then achieve an impression of time, an impression of belief. What is the core of belief, and how do we keep it alive? It is the day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute repetition and performance of action. In my Unbounded installation video series, the works are wood-based, painted with calcined porcelain. With porcelain's characteristics and fragility, these daily life actions and tools showcase the rigorous chore of maintaining belief alive, yet contrasting how vulnerable the concept of faith in something can be. In my sculpture works, repetitive layers of clay are like that of a tree ring, conjuring the consciousness of time, like how layers of our history stretch long and wide. Fragmented deposits challenge structural stability and warmth, with preservation being key elements to survive. So in this slide, to the left is the pre-fired sculpture, and on the right is the failed sculpture. I think we've all had those fragile things that we couldn't just throw away. And from this very piece was where I began my preservation. I want to ask, when is it worth keeping something, and how do we preserve something? In the 5th century, the technique of encaustic wax was used to preserve brushstrokes of religious motifs, mythology, and portraits, as now prolongs the existence of my fragile suggestive forms, like here in my prolongation series and subversive preservation. And now you can see this is the failed piece with the material wax giving a rebirth to the work, and some other failed pieces with wax rebirthing each piece. The face of femininity often veils truths, questioning what lies concealed. The ecstatic shell of our body never does justice to what is encapsulated inside. And because there are no shared manuscripts for those other experiences, what are we left to do? How do we tell the tale of our story? Our artwork is a curiosity cabinet for a collection that we place ourselves within. My Undoing series bends the line between pure femininity and cheeky honesty. At face value, it showcases the ideal stage of womanliness, yet at closer observance are given a magnifying glass to further uncover the hidden stories. My work is a collection of relics, manuscripts, conveying and preserving the routine of action, sexuality, and silence. Shapes are formed in the essence of erotic and austere. In this life, not all things are evident, not all ideas can be created, and not all questions will be answered. In our daily life, there are those times when we wonder what will come next, and all we can do is keep on making, keep on doing, and keep on believing. The license of credence is one we all carry, but when it comes down to it, is that belief? It only works when we put some elbow grease into it. You can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make them drink it. I would like to thank all of those who have lent their guiding hand. Their patience, their unwavering devotion to teaching has been truly humbling. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure now to introduce the last artist. Marissa Childers is a studio artist living in Oklahoma City. She has earned her BFA from the University of Alabama and her MFA from the University of Oklahoma. Marissa has exhibited extensively through the U.S. She has received NCECA's Graduate Fellowship awarded in 2021. She is named Ceramics Monthly Emerging Artist in 2022 and was awarded the Helen Zucker Seaman Research and Writing Fellowship for Women. Let's give a round of applause for Marissa.
All right, good morning, NCECA. I want to say thank you to friends and family. You know who you are. Kate got me emotional. But thank you for everyone who has played a part in this amazing journey so far. and I'm just really thankful to be here. So throughout history, domestic spaces have been categorized as a feminine sphere, and that leaves the word domesticity with this negative connotation that our culture often attaches to it. Through my art, I seek to enhance the beauty of the domestic space while shining a light on the work that often goes unseen. Using domesticity as a source of inspiration and pulling from craft once seen as women's work, I create pieces that redefine the domestic space and pay homage to the women who built them. I often explore more profound moments of connection and intimacy while I strive to make functional ceramic pieces that are elegant yet inviting to touch. Various textures and patterns are used to evoke a sense of nostalgic comfort, while small embellishments are meant to draw you in for a little bit of a closer look. I look for ways my work can weave into the lives of the others around me in order to enhance and honor our daily rituals. So I was born and raised in a super small town called Florence, Alabama, and I lived here for the first 27 years of my life, never traveling further than just a couple states away. So this is where I got my BFA in ceramics, but I didn't always do art and definitely didn't know what ceramics was. So I actually started out in accounting, and I was going to be an accounting major, because at a young age I thought, why not do accounting? I'll be rich, right? Like, I don't know what else I thought at the time, but this seemed like a good idea. Once I got to my junior year of college, I realized that accounting was definitely not the path that I wanted to take. I ended up stumbling into a ceramics class one day and just instantly had this amazing connection with the material. The first day I was in my first ceramics class, I stayed in class for 6 to 7 hours, just sitting there playing and learning with the material. In that town, there is maybe a whopping 32,000 people who live there, so it's a very tight-knit community, and it's hard to go anywhere without seeing someone you know. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the idea of home and intimate connections were very important to my lifestyle, but it also became a very important aspect of my work. So growing up, I loved to be in the kitchen. It was a way that I could sit and bake sweets all day and bring people around me closer together. And as I got a little older, I started going to work with my dad and learned how to build cabinets and furniture. And I may have only been 10 at the time, but I was very confident in my skill set at building cabinets and thought I was the best at the job and often tried to tell my dad how to do his own job. He quickly assigned me to the task of just creating and fixing all those small mess-ups that he made within the wood shop. And I think that's where my kind of this obsession of the tiny detail work came from. And these two things have played a huge role in my career as an artist. During the short time I've been creating, one question I always get asked is why functional work? And I truly believe that that stems from the memories and connections that I've made in the kitchen with my mom when I was younger. And while working with clay is much different from working with wood, I believe having grown up in the cabinet shop really informs my building process and my way of thinking. Pottery has this amazing way of enriching everyday objects with purpose and beauty. It is intended to be filled with food or drink, picked up and passed to a neighbor, and thoroughly enjoyed through use. And I believe a deeper connection to an object takes place through this daily interaction. Objects we interact with daily can become much more than a material item. Our minds have this way of making connections between objects and people. An inanimate object can become the signifier for an entire relationship or a moment from the past, as memories can materialize when we least expect them to. A texture may remind us of the couch in our childhood home, or a particular dish could stir up memories of family dinners, and that creates this sense of familiarity. I enjoy taking various objects with which we are familiar and charging those with information that acts as physical and visual cues for triggering a memory. They represent joyful moments that are meaningful to me, but I hope that they often become a stimulant for someone else's memories as well. It was actually really nice this week when I was talking to a lot of you. Many of you stopped by and told stories of how certain pieces that you saw on the show reminded you of these memories that you had at home with your family or something from your grandmother. And that was just a very wholesome experience for me to be able to share that with you and connect with you on a deeper level, and then also see the connection you had with the pieces. So this is a picture of some of the women in my family. So to the left, it's my grandmother and my great-grandmother, and then on the right is a slew of me, my cousin, and then a bunch of my aunts, and my mom. So sewing was once seen predominantly as a feminine activity. After the skill was acquired, a woman was expected to sew frequently and part of her household duties. I look back at the generations of women in my family and look at whose intellectual and artistic abilities were mostly channeled into homemaking. To pay homage to them and the work they did within the home, I pull my inspiration from artistic mediums, such as sewing, crocheting, and various forms of needlework. I focus on artistic skills and abilities that bring comfort, joy, and beauty into the domestic space. These attributes are what make a home so memorable to me. It's a place of retreat without the worries of the world around me. My artwork celebrates the moments of everyday life we take for granted, not only by elevating the domestic sphere, but also by acknowledging its invisibility and honoring its importance. I often approach things through familiarity. My building process, like I said, is very closely related to the hands-on construction that I learned in the shop with my dad. I construct each piece using clay slabs, as I find the joy in the repetition of measuring, cutting, and assembling. While it may be a different material, the approach and thought process have a likeness. The bases and trays I build, they give us a resting place for the pottery to sit and creates this feeling of comfort. In addition to the repetitive assembly, I design and cut out sewing templates for each of my ceramic forms. These templates are traced onto clay slabs, they're rolled onto texture and put together like fabric. So oftentimes when I'm creating these, I'm asking the question, what would this clay be doing if it were actually fabric? So how is it tearing apart? How is it folded? How is the clay responding when I'm wrinkling it? Because I want it to look as close to fabric as possible. And I also leave seams and attachments exposed just to further emphasize those hand-built elements. I believe it's very important that the method of construction is evident in the final product, as it becomes a way for me to bring the work of the homemaker into the piece. I had a lot of questions this week about the intentionality behind the cracks in the pieces. And I think that is something that I had to come to terms with myself. When I first made some pieces for my thesis show last spring, I had some issues with things cracking in the soda kiln. And I've kind of just learned to accept that for the beauty that it is. The cracks and subtle drips that are often created are due to the extremities of the kiln that I'm firing in. And rather than trying to hide those imperfections, I'm interested in drawing attention to them because I feel like it gives the artwork a little bit more breadth and brings it to life. It's also a good representation of items from within the home that has been used and loved. The surface that I create is created by making molds of various items such as embroidered pillowcases, sweaters, and often like corduroy work shirts. It adds an element of comfort and depth to the surface. And when the clay is still wet, sections of the texture gets peeled away. The illusion of torn fabric allows for the floral print to emerge from underneath the fabric-like surface. While ornament is often unconstrained by the need to function, I find pleasure in adorning functional objects we use daily. I use these objects as a symbol of the spaces that we occupy and embellish their surfaces to capture the viewer's full attention. I also see it as a way to nicely torture myself through the process. A lot of hours goes into all of the small detail work, but I just think that that's a really nice way to kind of still pay homage to those women that I'm talking about in my family, a lot of hard work goes into the things that they do within the home, and then it's often unseen. And I think that that's a nice way. A lot of people don't realize the amount of work that goes into the detail work on the pieces. So I talked to a lot of you this week about the idea of approaching my pieces at 30 feet, 3 feet, and 3 inches. That is just a way for me to approach my work and my process and kind of understand like different aspects of what people are going to pull from the work. So at 30 feet, I'm thinking about, what are you seeing as far as the profile and the form? But then at 3 feet, you're starting to get that more definition, I guess, of the surface and the texture that's on the pieces. But then at 3 inches, I feel like you get something a little bit more special. You start to have that really nice, intimate moment with the piece. And oftentimes I'll put things somewhere that you might not see until after maybe the third or fourth time you've used it. And someone just passing by is not going to get that kind of reaction in the same way as someone who's really interacting with the piece. The inclusion of these details, I believe, help tell a story, as it gives the piece personality and life. Small flowers may peep through your morning coffee, or a gold accent will reflect the sunlight when it's picked up from the shelf. Details not only allude to moments of the past, but they also create new ones. I've really enjoyed this newer exploration of furniture, as it has allowed me another way to bring the subject of domesticity into the conversation within the gallery space. Moving forward, I hope to further envelop my work with the idea of domestic space being one of joy, comfort, and beauty. I intend to reinterpret the feminine domestic interior while encouraging others to approach the space with a different frame of mind. I hope these small shifts in perspective will offer new ways of seeing and understanding as it deepens our appreciation for the domestic sphere that surrounds us. Thank you.
Emerging artists up here. I told you, didn't I? Right? I'm so proud of these wonderful folks. The ability to delve into the hard questions and bring themselves forward and show themselves. We are so privileged to have them here as the 2023 NCECA Emerging Artists. This NCECA has been my feels NCECA. I'm so proud of this group. I'm ending my time here on the board. It has been lovely to see what NCECA continues to become, the way it invites people who are hovering around the edges into and wants to hear what they have to say, I think is one of the most beautiful things about this organization. My eldest child is here as co-president of the Beloit Clay Club. To have my biological family here at my chosen family, and it's like, somebody asked me what that's like, and I said it's really different walking around NCECA feeling you're about ready to cry. And it's hard to leave this job, but it's easier knowing that the next director at large is Michelle Castro. Michelle Castro was the former student director at large and has stepped right into the role and has been a blessing for the board. Michelle Castro is a ceramic artist whose practice addresses social issues. From Midwestern State University, she received a Bachelor of Fine Arts with an emphasis in ceramics and a minor emphasis in graphic design. She is in her final year at Florida State University as a Master of Fine Arts and Studio Arts. Castro spent the spring of 2021 as an artist in residence at Midwestern State University, concurrently with her studies at Florida State University. She's a worker. And was an instructor of record, virtually teaching beginning ceramics. In March 2020, she was elected to the board of the National Council on the Education for the Ceramic Arts. This summer, she's planning to participate in Smoother Pebble, a collaboration between physicists and engineers at the European Council for Nuclear Research. in France, Switzerland, and artist from Florida State University. I really feel very comfortable passing on this job to her.